The distant crack of gunfire split the morning air as Willow Hayes urged her horse faster along the dusty Arizona trail, a desperate prayer on her lips that she would reach Copper Creek in time to prevent more bloodshed. The year was 1878, and the frontier town that had become her home over the past 3 years was facing yet another crisis, one that threatened to tear apart what little peace they had managed to build in this unforgiving territory. Willow's dark brown hair, usually kept in a neat braid, had come loose during her urgent ride, whipping behind her as her horse thundered down the final stretch toward town. At 32, she had seen enough violence in the West to last several lifetimes, and as the schoolteacher in Copper Creek, she had dedicated herself to bringing education and civility to this corner of the frontier. The main street came into view, and Willow felt her stomach clench at the scene unfolding before her. A crowd had gathered outside the saloon, and at its center stood Sheriff Mills, his hand hovering near his holster as he faced off against 2 young men, both barely into adulthood, both with expressions of defiance etched across their sun-bronzed faces. Behind them stood a man Willow recognized immediately. Kent Thornton, owner of the Rocking T Ranch and one of the most respected and stubborn ranchers in the territory. His weathered face betrayed a mixture of anger and helplessness as he watched his sons challenge the sheriff's authority. Willow pulled her horse to a stop and dismounted quickly, pushing her way through the crowd. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. "I told you boys to hand over those pistols," Sheriff Mills was saying, his voice strained with the effort to remain calm. "There'll be no more shooting in this town." The taller of Kent's sons, Samuel, if Willow remembered correctly, stepped forward, his hand dangerously close to his weapon. "We were just having some fun. No one got hurt." "You shot out Mrs. Farley's front window," the sheriff countered. "And put a bullet through the barber's sign, in broad daylight in the middle of town." The second son, Daniel, laughed. "Poor aim, I guess." Kent Thornton finally stepped forward, placing a restraining hand on his eldest son's shoulder. "Sam, Daniel, that's enough. Give the sheriff your guns." But Samuel shrugged off his father's hand. "We don't need to listen to him. Or you." Willow saw Kent's face darken with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. The proud rancher was losing control of his sons in front of the entire town, and everyone knew it. "My sons don't listen to anyone," Kent muttered, loud enough for Willow to hear as she approached. His voice carried a note of defeat that tugged at her heart, despite the seriousness of the situation. "Then let me teach them kindness," Willow replied, stepping forward before she could reconsider. All eyes turned to her. Sheriff Mills looked relieved at her intervention, while Kent Thornton's expression was one of surprise and skepticism. His sons, however, regarded her with open disdain. "Miss Hayes," Samuel said with a mocking tip of his hat, "come to give us a lesson." "School's out for the day." Willow held her ground, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Education doesn't end at the schoolhouse door, Mr. Thornton, and it seems to me you and your brother could use a few extra lessons." Daniel stepped closer, towering over her by nearly a foot. "What could you possibly teach us?" Willow straightened her spine. "For starters, how to be gentlemen rather than reckless boys with guns." She turned to the sheriff. "If Mr. Thornton agrees, I believe community service might be more beneficial than jail time. They can start by repairing Mrs. Farley's window and the barber's sign." Kent Thornton looked at her as if she'd just proposed his sons should fly to the moon. "Miss Hayes, with all due respect, my boys aren't the type to take responsibility for their actions," Willow interrupted. "Then perhaps it's time they learned." The crowd had grown silent, watching the exchange with undisguised interest. Kent's reputation as a fair but formidable man was well established in Copper Creek. He had built his ranch from nothing after coming west as a young man 15 years earlier, following the death of his wife in childbirth with their third son, a baby who had not survived either. The loss had left Kent to raise Samuel and Daniel alone, and the town had watched the boys grow from quiet, grief-stricken children into wild young men who seemed determined to test every boundary. Kent's blue eyes studied Willow with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. At 45, the years of hard work and harder living had left their mark on him, silver threading through his dark blonde hair, lines etched deeply around his eyes from years squinting in the sun. But he remained a handsome man, strong and vital and completely at a loss when it came to his sons. "What exactly did you have in mind, Miss Hayes?" he finally asked. Willow felt a small thrill of victory. She had expected more resistance. 3 hours of service each day for 2 weeks. They'll repair the damage they've caused and assist me with various projects that will benefit the town. Samuel opened his mouth to protest, but Kent raised a hand, silencing him, a small miracle in itself. "And if they refuse?" Kent asked. "Then I imagine Sheriff Mills has a perfectly adequate jail cell waiting for them," Willow replied. "The choice is theirs." Sheriff Mills nodded his agreement. "Sounds fair to me." Daniel glared at Willow. "We're not children you can order around, Miss Hayes." "No," Willow agreed. "You're young men who should know better, but since you've chosen to act like children, you leave us little choice but to treat you as such." A tense silence followed her words. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how the Thornton boys would respond. Kent's jaw worked as he glanced between his sons and Willow, clearly calculating the odds of this intervention succeeding where his own authority had failed. Finally, Samuel spoke. "Fine, 2 weeks, but only because jail would be a waste of time." "Samuel," Kent began, clearly displeased with his son's tone. "It's all right, Mr. Thornton," Willow interrupted. "Actions speak louder than words. I'll judge them by what they do, not what they say." She turned to the brothers. "I expect both of you at Mrs. Farley's house at 7 tomorrow morning to begin repairs. Don't be late." With that, she turned and walked back toward her horse, aware of the eyes following her. As she mounted, she caught Kent's gaze. There was something in his expression, respect, perhaps, mixed with a touch of hope that caused an unexpected flutter in her chest. Willow dismissed the feeling and rode toward the small house she rented at the edge of town. She had just volunteered to spend 2 weeks with the 2 most troublesome young men in Copper Creek. What on earth had she been thinking? The following morning dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of heat to come as the sun rose higher in the sky. Willow arrived at Mrs. Farley's modest home 10 minutes before 7, surprised to find Kent Thornton already there, tools in hand. "Mr. Thornton," she greeted him, her voice revealing her surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here." Kent nodded, his expression serious. "Thought I should lend a hand. Make sure the boys do the work properly." He hesitated, then added, "And I wanted to thank you for stepping in yesterday. Not many would have." Willow studied him, noting the sincerity in his blue eyes. "Your sons aren't bad young men, Mr. Thornton, just misguided, perhaps." A shadow crossed his face. "Been trying to guide them right since their mother passed. Not sure I've done such a good job of it." The vulnerability in his admission touched her. "Raising children alone isn't easy, especially boys." "No, it's not." He looked down at the tools in his hands. "Sarah, my wife, she would have known how to handle them. She had a gentleness about her that I've never possessed." Willow was saved from responding by the arrival of Samuel and Daniel, both looking as if they'd rather be anywhere else. Samuel rode a magnificent black stallion, while Daniel was mounted on a chestnut mare. Both horses spoke of quality and careful breeding. Kent Thornton might be struggling with his sons, but his ranch was clearly prosperous. "You're on time," Willow observed as they dismounted. "That's a promising start," Daniel scowled. "Let's just get this over with." Kent's face hardened. "You'll show Miss Hayes proper respect, Daniel, both of you will." Samuel tied his horse to the hitching post. "Yes, sir," he replied, though his tone held little sincerity. For the next 3 hours, Willow directed the repair work on Mrs. Farley's window. Kent worked alongside his sons, demonstrating a skill with carpentry that Willow hadn't expected from a rancher. The brothers worked grudgingly but competently, following their father's instructions even as they ignored his attempts at conversation. Mrs. Farley, a widow in her 60s, brought them lemonade mid-morning, eyeing the Thornton boys warily but thanking them for the repairs nonetheless. "These young men have something to say to you," Willow prompted when they had finished their drinks. Samuel and Daniel exchanged a look of annoyance, but after a pointed glare from their father, Samuel spoke. "We apologize for the damage to your window, Mrs. Farley. It won't happen again." The apology was stiff and rehearsed, but Mrs. Farley accepted it with a gracious nod. See that it doesn't, young man. I'm too old to be dodging bullets in my own front room. When the window was repaired and they had moved on to the barber's sign, Kent pulled Willow aside. I've got to get back to the ranch, he said. Got hands waiting on instructions for the day. Will you be all right with the boys? Willow nodded. We'll be fine, Mr. Thornton. The sheriff is just across the street if needed, but I don't think it will come to that. Kent's eyes searched her face, concern evident in his expression. They're strong-headed, my boys, and they're not used to taking orders from anyone but me, and even that's become rare these days. Perhaps that's part of the problem, Willow suggested gently. Young men need to understand their place in the community, not just on the ranch. They need to respect others, not just their father. Kent considered her words. You've got wisdom beyond your years, Miss Hayes, Willow smiled. Not wisdom, just experience with difficult students. She hesitated, then added, Will you join us tomorrow? I think your presence makes a difference. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at being needed. I'll be here, he promised. True to his word, Kent appeared each morning for the next week as Willow put his sons to work on various tasks around town. They repaired the church steps, helped the blacksmith organize his shop, and cleared weeds from the small-town cemetery. Kent worked alongside them whenever possible, leaving only when ranch business demanded his attention. By the end of the first week, a subtle change had begun in the Thornton brothers. Their resistance remained, but it had softened around the edges. Samuel, in particular, had begun to show interest in the work, asking questions and offering suggestions that occasionally revealed a keen intelligence beneath his rebellious exterior. On Saturday, as they finished painting the schoolhouse fence, Willow observed Samuel step back to examine their work with a critical eye. The corner post still needs another coat, he said, reaching for the paintbrush again. You've got a good eye for detail, Willow commented. Samuel shrugged, but she caught the hint of pleasure in his expression at the compliment. Just doing the job right. Daniel, overhearing, rolled his eyes. Since when do you care about doing anything right, Sam? Since now, Samuel replied, surprising both Willow and his brother with the firmness in his voice. Later, as they cleaned up, Kent arrived to collect his sons. He surveyed the freshly painted fence with approval. Looks good. You boys did fine work here. Daniel merely nodded, but Samuel straightened slightly at the praise. Miss Hayes showed us how to do it properly. Kent's eyes met Willow's over his son's head, a silent message of gratitude passing between them. Well, I'm glad you were listening to someone at least. That evening, as Willow sat on her small porch watching the sunset, the sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. Kent Thornton rode up to her gate alone, his expression unreadable in the fading light. Mr. Thornton, she said, setting aside the book she had been reading, is everything all right? Kent dismounted and tied his horse to the fence post. Everything's fine, Miss Hayes. I just wanted to speak with you privately if that's acceptable. Willow gestured to the second chair on her porch. Of course. Would you like some coffee? No, thank you. He removed his hat as he climbed the steps, revealing hair damp with sweat from his ride. He sat beside her, his large frame making the small porch chair seem inadequate. I wanted to thank you properly for what you're doing with my boys. Willow waved away his thanks. They're making progress. Samuel, especially, seems to be finding satisfaction in the work. Kent nodded, turning his hat in his hands. I've noticed. It's been years since I've seen him take pride in anything. He paused, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains now bathed in the purple light of dusk. After their mother died, I threw myself into building the ranch. Thought if I could make it successful enough, provide well enough, it would make up for them not having a mother. A common mistake, Willow said gently. Children need time and attention more than material comfort. Yes, I realize that now. His voice was rough with regret. By the time I understood what I'd done, they were already half-grown and full of anger. Samuel was 8 and Daniel 6 when Sarah died, old enough to remember her but young enough to feel abandoned when I disappeared into my work. Willow's heart ached for the broken family before her. It's not too late, Mr. Thornton. They're young men now, but they still need their father. Kent turned to look at her directly, and in the deepening twilight, his blue eyes held a vulnerability that made him seem younger, less the formidable rancher and more a man seeking answers. How do you do it, Miss Hayes? They've responded more to you in a week than they have to me in years. Willow considered her answer carefully. I set clear expectations and consequences. I'm firm but fair, and most importantly, I show them respect even when they don't immediately return it. You treat them like men, not boys, Kent observed. Yes, but men who are still learning their way. She hesitated, then added, and I don't carry the weight of being their parent. That makes it easier for them to accept direction from me. Kent nodded slowly. I've made many mistakes, too strict at times, too absent at others. He sighed heavily. Their mother would be disappointed in how they've turned out. I don't believe that's true, Willow said. They're finding their way, and they have qualities to admire: strength, determination, loyalty to each other. Those are foundations to build upon. Kent studied her with newfound interest. You see the good in people, don't you, even when they make it difficult, Willow smiled. I've found it's the only way to teach effectively. You must believe in the potential of your students, or why bother teaching at all? For the first time since she'd known him, Kent Thornton smiled, fully a transformation that lit his weathered features and crinkled the corners of his eyes. You would have made a fine mother, Miss Hayes. The personal observation caught her off guard, bringing a flush to her cheeks that she hoped was hidden by the growing darkness. That's kind of you to say, Mr. Thornton. He seemed to realize the intimacy of his comment and stood abruptly. I should be getting back to the ranch. The boys will be wondering where I've gone. Willow rose as well. Of course. Will you be joining us on Monday? I thought we might help Mr. Jensen repair his corral. It was damaged in the storm last month, and he's been unable to fix it with his rheumatism acting up. I'll be there, Kent promised, settling his hat back on his head. He descended the porch steps, then paused and turned back. Miss Hayes, Willow, I'm grateful, more than I can properly express. The use of her given name sent an unexpected warmth through her. Good night, Mr. Thornton. Kent, he corrected gently. I think we've moved beyond formalities. She nodded, a smile playing at her lips. Good night, Kent. As she watched him ride away, Willow acknowledged a troubling truth. She was developing feelings for Kent Thornton that extended well beyond her role as a teacher helping his wayward sons. Feelings that could complicate matters considerably if she allowed them to grow. The second week of the brothers' community service brought more visible changes. Daniel remained resistant, but even he had begun to work without constant supervision. Samuel, meanwhile, had developed an unexpected interest in carpentry, paying close attention whenever Kent demonstrated a technique. On Wednesday, they spent the day at the Rocking T Ranch itself, helping to repair outbuildings damaged in the same storm that had affected Mr. Jensen's property. It was Willow's first visit to the ranch, and she was impressed by its size and obvious prosperity. The main house was a substantial two-story structure of weathered wood and stone, with a wide veranda wrapping around three sides. Barns, corrals, and bunkhouses for the ranch hands were arranged in a neat complex nearby, while cattle grazed on the grasslands stretching toward the distant mountains. Your home is beautiful, Willow told Kent as he showed her around. Thank you. Built most of it myself with help from the hands. There was pride in his voice, tempered with something else, perhaps loneliness, Willow thought, noting how the large house seemed to emphasize the absence of a woman's touch. Inside, the house was well built but sparsely decorated. A portrait of a beautiful young woman hung above the fireplace, Sarah Thornton, with the same striking blue eyes as Samuel and Daniel's lighter brown ones. The resemblance between mother and sons was strong, particularly with Samuel, who had inherited her fine features along with her coloring. Your wife was lovely, Willow said softly. Kent stood beside her, gazing up at the portrait. Yes, she was, inside and out. He was silent for a moment before adding, I've kept everything as she left it. Perhaps that was a mistake, another way of living in the past instead of moving forward. Willow glanced around the room with new understanding. The house wasn't just lacking a woman's touch, it was frozen in time, preserved like a memorial. Change is difficult, she said, especially when it means accepting a loss. Kent's eyes remained on the portrait. For years after she died, I woke up each morning expecting to find her beside me. When reality hit, it was like losing her all over again. He shook his head as if to clear away the memories. I shouldn't burden you with this. It's not a burden to listen, Willow assured him. She hesitated, then asked, do the boys speak of her often? Almost never. I think it's too painful for them. Kent moved away from the portrait. But perhaps that's another mistake I've made, not talking about her enough, not keeping her memory alive in a way that brings comfort rather than pain. Before Willow could respond, Samuel entered the room. He stopped short at the sight of them standing beneath his mother's portrait, his expression closing off immediately. The roof on the storage shed is fixed, he reported to his father, his voice deliberately neutral. Thank you, son. Kent seemed uncertain how to proceed. Miss Hayes was just admiring the house. Samuel's eyes flicked to Willow, then back to his father. Daniel's waiting for me at the corral. We need to check those fence posts before sundown. He left without waiting for a response, his departure leaving a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. Kent sighed heavily. You see what I'm dealing with. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. Willow touched his arm gently. He saw us under his mother's portrait. That likely stirred emotions he wasn't prepared for. Kent looked down at her hand on his arm, then up to her face. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition of the growing connection that neither had acknowledged aloud. Willow withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of being alone with him in his home. Perhaps we should join the boys outside, she suggested, her voice not quite steady. Kent nodded, though reluctance was evident in his expression. Of course. The ride back to town that evening was quiet, with Samuel and Daniel riding ahead while Kent and Willow followed at a more sedate pace. The setting sun bathed the landscape in golden light, turning the dust kicked up by the horses' hooves into a glittering cloud. Will you come to dinner on Sunday? Kent asked suddenly. After church, nothing formal, just a meal with us. Willow was startled by the invitation. I wouldn't want to impose. It's not an imposition, it's a thank you. He glanced at his sons' backs, then added in a lower voice, and perhaps having you there might ease some of the tension between us. Give us something to talk about beyond ranch business and old grievances. Put that way, Willow found it difficult to refuse. Then I accept, thank you. His smile was worth any potential awkwardness the dinner might bring. Thank you. Sunday arrived clear and warm. Church services in Copper Creek were always well attended, as much for the social aspect as for spiritual nourishment. Willow sat in her usual pew, aware of the Thornton men, several rows behind her. She had taken extra care with her appearance that morning, wearing her best dress of deep blue calico and arranging her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual simple braid. After the service, as congregation members gathered outside to socialize, Willow found herself approached by Martha Johnson, the mayor's wife and one of the town's most dedicated gossips. Miss Hayes, Martha greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I understand you've been spending quite a lot of time with the Thornton family lately. Willow maintained her composure. Yes, Samuel and Daniel have been performing community service under my supervision. They've made excellent progress. Martha's smile thinned. How fortunate for them to have your guidance, and for their father as well, I imagine. Before Willow could respond to the implied impropriety, Kent appeared at her side. Mrs. Johnson, he greeted the older woman with a tip of his hat. Beautiful service today, wasn't it? Martha's expression shifted immediately to one of deference. Kent Thornton might be struggling with his sons, but his position as one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory commanded respect. Indeed it was, Mr. Thornton. I was just commending Miss Hayes on her work with your boys. She's worked miracles, Kent agreed, his voice warm as he glanced at Willow. We're all grateful for her influence. Martha's eyes darted between them, clearly noting the familiarity in Kent's tone. Well, our community is blessed to have dedicated teachers like Miss Hayes. When Martha had moved on to her next social target, Kent leaned closer to Willow. Sorry about that. Martha Johnson has appointed herself moral guardian of Copper Creek despite her own questionable past. Willow raised an eyebrow. Questionable? Kent's eyes twinkled with mischief. Let's just say she and the mayor had a very short engagement and their first child arrived remarkably soon after the wedding. Willow couldn't help but laugh, earning curious glances from nearby churchgoers. Mr. Thornton, I'm shocked at your gossip. Kent, he reminded her. And it's not gossip if it's common knowledge. His expression grew more serious. People will talk, Willow. Small towns run on gossip like engines run on coal, but you shouldn't let it bother you. I've been teaching in Copper Creek for 3 years, she replied. I'm well acquainted with the town's love of speculation. Good. He offered his arm. Shall we? The boys are already heading to the ranch. The simple gesture of taking his arm felt significant somehow, as if they were declaring something to the watching town. Willow hesitated only briefly, before placing her hand on his sleeve, aware of the eyes following them as they walked to where their horses were tethered. Dinner at the Thornton ranch was a tense affair at first. Samuel and Daniel had clearly been instructed to be on their best behavior, but their discomfort was evident in their stiff posture and minimal conversation. Kent tried valiantly to generate discussion, asking questions about school and town affairs, but received mostly monosyllabic responses from his sons. It was when Willow mentioned a book she had been reading that Samuel finally engaged. Moby Dick, he asked, surprise evident in his voice. You're reading Melville, Willow nodded. It's my second time through it, actually. I find I notice different aspects with each reading. Samuel leaned forward slightly. I read it last winter, found it in Father's study. Kent looked startled. I didn't know you'd read that. A flicker of defensiveness crossed Samuel's face. There's a lot you don't know about me. Rather than allow tension to build, Willow asked, What did you think of it, Samuel? He considered the question seriously. I thought Ahab was justified at first. The whale took his leg, so his obsession made sense, but by the end, he shook his head. By the end, it seemed like madness, destroying everything and everyone around him for vengeance. A thoughtful analysis, Willow said. Many readers miss the tragedy of Ahab's self-destruction. Samuel straightened at the praise, and for the first time, Willow caught a glimpse of the young man he could become: intelligent, articulate, confident in the right ways rather than the wrong ones. The conversation flowed more easily after that, with even Daniel contributing occasionally. When the meal was finished, Samuel surprised everyone by offering to show Willow the library. Father's collected quite a few books over the years, he explained as he led her to a small room off the main parlor, though I don't think he reads them much anymore. The room was lined with bookshelves, well stocked with volumes ranging from practical guides on ranching and animal husbandry to classics of literature and philosophy. Willow ran her fingers along the spines, impressed by the collection. Your father is a man of diverse interests, she observed. Samuel nodded. Mother loved books. He kept buying them after she died, like he was still trying to please her. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet sadness. I started reading them a few years ago. Felt like maybe I could understand her better that way. Willow's heart ached at the vulnerability in his admission. That's a beautiful way to connect with her memory. Samuel looked away, embarrassed by his openness. Daniel thinks it's stupid, says I should focus on practical things like the ranch. Different people grieve differently, Willow said gently. There's no right or wrong way. Is that what we're still doing, grieving? Samuel's question held genuine confusion. It's been 15 years. Some losses leave marks that never fully heal, Willow replied. Especially when they happen at formative times in our lives. Samuel was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. You're different from other adults, he finally said. You actually listen instead of just telling us what to do or how to feel. That's because your thoughts and feelings matter, Willow told him. Even when they lead you to make choices others don't agree with, like shooting up the town. There was a hint of humor in his voice now. Well, I might draw the line at property destruction, Willow acknowledged with a smile. But anger itself isn't wrong, Samuel. It's what you do with it that matters. Before he could respond, Kent appeared in the doorway. Everything all right in here? Samuel's openness vanished instantly, his expression closing off as he stepped away from Willow. Just showing Miss Hayes the books, he said, his tone reverting to careful neutrality. It's an impressive collection, Willow said, trying to ease the sudden tension. You should be proud. Kent looked between them, clearly sensing he had interrupted something significant. Most of these were Sarah's choices. She had excellent taste. An awkward silence fell, broken only when Daniel appeared behind his father. "Riders coming," he reported. "Looks like Jake Foster and some of his men." Kent's expression hardened immediately. "Stay inside," he ordered, moving quickly toward the front door. Samuel ignored the command, following his father with Daniel close behind. After a moment's hesitation, Willow went too, concerned by the sudden change in atmosphere. From the porch, she could see 6 riders approaching, dust billowing behind their horses as they neared the house. Kent stood at the top of the steps, his posture rigid with tension. Samuel and Daniel flanked him, their earlier rebelliousness replaced by solidarity in the face of apparent threat. "Who is Jake Foster?" Willow asked quietly. "Neighboring rancher," Samuel replied without taking his eyes off the approaching men. "Been trying to push our northern boundary for years, claims the water rights to Silverstone Creek are his." The riders pulled up in front of the house, the leader dismounting with deliberate slowness. Jake Foster was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, his face weathered by sun and wind, his eyes cold as he surveyed the Thorntons. "Bit late for a social call, Foster," Kent called, his voice hard. "This ain't social, Thornton." Foster spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dirt. "Found 3 of my steers dead this morning, shot on the north side of the creek." Kent's expression didn't change. "And you're here because..." "Because your boys were seen riding in that area yesterday," Foster snarled. "And everyone knows they're fond of using their guns when they shouldn't." Samuel stepped forward. "That's a lie. We were in town all day working on community service. Ask Miss Hayes." Foster's gaze shifted to Willow, noticing her for the first time. His eyes narrowed. "This your latest attempt to appear respectable, Thornton, bringing the schoolteacher out to your ranch?" Kent's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You're insulting a lady in my home, Foster. I suggest you apologize before this gets ugly." The tension crackled in the air like heat lightning. Willow moved forward to stand beside Kent, her heart racing but her voice steady as she addressed Foster directly. "Mr. Samuel is correct. Both he and his brother were under my supervision all day yesterday, repairing Mr. Jensen's corral and then working here at the ranch. They couldn't possibly have shot your cattle." Foster studied her with undisguised skepticism. "No offense, madam, but I don't put much stock in the word of a woman who's clearly friendly with the Thorntons." Kent moved so quickly that Willow barely saw him step forward before he had Foster by the collar, nearly lifting the man off his feet. "I told you to apologize to the lady." Foster's men reached for their weapons, but Samuel and Daniel were faster, both drawing guns that Willow hadn't even realized they were carrying. The standoff lasted only seconds before Foster raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "No need for bloodshed, Thornton," he said. "I'll take the lady's word for now." Kent released him with a slight push that made Foster stumble. "Now get off my property, and if I find out you're shooting your own cattle to frame my family, there'll be consequences." Foster straightened his jacket, his face dark with humiliation and anger. "This isn't over, Thornton, not by a long shot." His eyes shifted to Samuel and Daniel. "You boys ought to be careful riding alone. Accidents happen in this territory." The threat hung in the air as Foster remounted and led his men away. No one on the porch moved until the riders had disappeared into the gathering dusk. Finally, Kent turned to Willow, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry you had to witness that." Willow found her voice, though it wasn't as steady as she would have liked. "Are threats like that common between ranchers?" "Foster's been pushing for years," Kent replied. "But this is the first time he's tried to blame my sons directly." He looked at Samuel and Daniel with newfound concern. "I want you boys staying close to the ranch for a while, no riding out alone." To Willow's surprise, neither son argued with the directive. The confrontation seemed to have temporarily united the family in a way nothing else had. "I should get back to town," Willow said, suddenly aware of how late it had grown. "I have school tomorrow." "I'll ride with you," Kent said immediately. "Samuel, Daniel, stay here and alert the hands. I want extra patrols along the northern boundary tonight." The brothers nodded, all earlier rebellion forgotten in the face of a common enemy. As Willow mounted her horse, Samuel approached her. "Thank you for speaking up," he said quietly. "Foster would have pushed harder if you hadn't been here." Willow was touched by his gratitude, I only told the truth. Samuel's eyes, so like his mother's, held a new respect as he looked at her. Still, thank you. The ride to town was tense, with Kent constantly scanning their surroundings as if expecting an ambush. Willow wanted to ask more about the conflict with Foster, but sensed Kent's preoccupation and remained silent. Only when they reached the outskirts of Copper Creek did Kent seem to relax slightly. I apologize for the disruption to our dinner, he said, and for exposing you to Foster's crudeness. There's no need for apology, Willow assured him. I'm more concerned about the threat to your sons. Kent's expression darkened again. Foster's always been all talk, but something's different this time. He seemed desperate. Could he really have killed his own cattle to create trouble for you? It wouldn't be the first time such tactics have been used in range wars, Kent replied grimly. But Foster's always been too practical for such wasteful gestures. Something doesn't add up. They reached Willow's small house, and Kent dismounted to help her down from her horse. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and when she looked up at him, the concern in his eyes had been joined by something warmer. Thank you for today, he said softly. Despite everything, it meant a lot having you there. Willow was acutely aware of their proximity, of the strength in his hands still resting lightly at her waist. I enjoyed it, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Even the dramatic conclusion, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not exactly the peaceful Sunday I had planned. The West is rarely peaceful, Willow observed. It's one of its more reliable qualities. Kent laughed softly, the sound warming her more effectively than her shawl against the evening chill. You have a way of finding humor even in difficulty. A necessary skill for a teacher, she replied. For a moment, it seemed he might say something more, might even close the small distance between them. But instead he stepped back, releasing her waist. I should get back to the ranch. Will you be all right here alone? Of course. Foster has no quarrel with me. Kent nodded, though he looked unconvinced. Lock your doors tonight just the same. I always do, she assured him. He mounted his horse and tipped his hat. Good night, Willow. Good night, Kent. She watched him ride away, the conflicting emotions within her impossible to untangle. Concern for the Thorntons' ward with a growing attraction to Kent that seemed more dangerous than any range war. Willow had come west to teach, to make a difference in children's lives, not to fall in love with a troubled rancher and his rebellious sons. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, her thoughts kept returning to the feel of Kent's hands at her waist, to the unspoken possibilities that had hummed between them in that moment outside her door. For the first time in years, Willow found herself imagining a different future than the one she had planned, one that included a family of her own. The final days of Samuel and Daniel's community service passed quickly. The confrontation with Foster seemed to have triggered a change in both young men, particularly Samuel. He worked diligently, asked thoughtful questions, and even began to show genuine interest in the people they were helping. Daniel remained more reserved, but his open hostility had faded, replaced by a watchful assessment that Willow found encouraging. Kent joined them when ranch business allowed, his presence creating a tenuous bridge between his sons and himself. Willow observed their interactions with hope, noting small moments of connection. Samuel helping his father measure lumber without being asked, Kent complimenting Daniel's skill with horses, all three men working side by side in companionable silence. On Friday, their final day of service, they completed repairs to the roof of the church, a project that had been delayed for months due to lack of funds and manpower. From the ground, Willow watched the Thornton men working above, their movements displaying a coordination that spoke of their blood connection despite years of emotional distance. Reverend Parker stood beside her, following her gaze with appreciation. Those boys have changed these past 2 weeks, he observed. You've done good work, Miss Hayes. They've done the work themselves, Willow corrected. I just provided direction. Sometimes that's all people need. The Reverend smiled knowingly. Direction and the belief that they can be better than they've been. As the men descended from the roof, Willow felt a curious mixture of satisfaction and loss. The official period of community service was ending, and with it, her daily contact with the Thorntons. Despite the unusual circumstances of their connection, she had grown fond of both Samuel and Daniel, and her feelings for Kent had only deepened with each day spent in his company. "Well, Miss Hayes," Samuel said as they gathered their tools, "I believe our debt to society is paid." There was humor in his voice rather than resentment, and Willow smiled in response. "Indeed it is, Mr. Thornton, and paid admirably." "Does this mean we're free men again?" Daniel asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "Free to make better choices, I hope," Willow replied. Kent approached, having overheard the exchange. "Your freedom was never in question, Daniel, only your judgment." Instead of the defensive response Willow had come to expect, Daniel merely shrugged. "Fair enough." The simple acknowledgement represented such progress that Willow had to fight back a surge of emotion. 2 weeks earlier, such a comment from Kent would have triggered immediate rebellion from his younger son. "I thought we might celebrate the completion of your service," Kent said, addressing all of them. "There's a harvest dance in town tomorrow night. I thought we might attend, all of us." Samuel and Daniel exchanged surprised glances. "A dance?" Samuel asked. "You haven't gone to a town dance in years." "Perhaps it's time I rejoined society," Kent replied, his eyes finding Willow's. "If Miss Hayes would do me the honor of saving me a dance." The public nature of the invitation sent a flutter through Willow's chest. Kent was essentially declaring his interest to his sons and anyone else within earshot. "I would be delighted," she replied. Aware of the Reverend's interested observation nearby, Samuel looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his face. "Well, I suppose we could make an appearance," he said, "though I'm not promising any dancing." Daniel nodded his agreement, though with less enthusiasm. "Might be some pretty girls there, at least," Kent laughed. The sound relaxed in a way Willow had rarely heard. "That's settled, then." "We'll see you at the dance, Miss Hayes." As they rode away, Reverend Parker moved to stand beside Willow. "Kent Thornton is a good man," he said quietly. "Been carrying his grief like a cross for too long. It's good to see him looking forward instead of back." Willow felt a blush warm her cheeks. "We're just friends, Reverend." The older man's eyes twinkled with amusement. "For now, perhaps, but I've been marrying folks in this territory for 30 years, Miss Hayes. I know the look of a man who's finding reasons to live again." The harvest dance was held in the town hall, a sturdy building that served as meeting place, courthouse, and social center for Copper Creek. By early evening, it was transformed with lanterns, autumn foliage, and tables laden with food brought by nearly every family in town. A small band of local musicians provided lively music, and the wooden floor was soon filled with dancers. Willow arrived early to help with final preparations, wearing her best dress of deep green silk, a luxury she rarely indulged in but had purchased during her last visit to Denver. The color complemented her brown hair and eyes, and the cut, while modest, highlighted her slender figure. Martha Johnson, still the self-appointed guardian of town propriety, approached as Willow arranged cups near the punch bowl. "What a lovely dress, Miss Hayes," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Special occasion, just the harvest dance," Willow replied pleasantly. "As it is for everyone else." Martha's smile thinned. "I understand the Thornton family will be attending tonight." Quite unusual for them since the tragedy. Willow maintained her composure. "I believe Mr. Thornton felt it was time to participate more in community events. How fortunate that his change of heart coincides with your influence on his sons." Martha leaned closer, lowering her voice. "A word of friendly advice, my dear. Kent Thornton may be wealthy, but he carries burdens that would crush most women. And those boys of his, well, 2 weeks of good behavior doesn't erase years of wildness." "Thank you for your concern," Willow said, keeping her tone neutral despite the anger building within her. "But I form my own opinions of people based on direct experience." "Of course you do," Martha patted her arm condescendingly. "Youth is always so confident in its judgments." Before Willow could respond, the main doors opened and the Thornton men entered. They made a striking trio, Kent in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, Samuel and Daniel in similar attire, but with the addition of polished boots and string ties that marked them as ranchers rather than businessmen. All three had clearly taken special care with their appearance, their hair neatly trimmed, and their faces freshly shaved. A momentary hush fell over the gathering as people noticed their arrival. Kent's attendance at social functions was rare enough to cause comment, but the presence of his sons, whose reputations for troublemaking were well established, created a ripple of whispers throughout the hall. Kent's eyes found Willow immediately, and the appreciation in his gaze as he took in her appearance sent warmth spreading through her. He made his way to her side, his sons following a step behind. "Miss Hayes," he greeted her, his voice warm with admiration. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she replied, suddenly shy under the scrutiny of onlookers. "You all look very handsome this evening." Samuel grinned, some of his usual cockiness returning. "Clean up pretty good for ranch hands, don't we?" But there was no edge to his words, only good-natured humor. The band struck up a lively reel, and couples began moving onto the dance floor. Daniel surprised everyone by turning to a pretty girl nearby the blacksmith's daughter and asking her to dance. After her startled acceptance, he led her into the whirl of dancers with unexpected grace. "Apparently my younger son has hidden talents," Kent observed with amusement. "Would you care to dance, Willow?" The use of her given name in public felt significant, a deliberate choice that would certainly be noted and discussed. But as she placed her hand in his, Willow found she no longer cared about town gossip. Kent led her onto the floor with confidence, his hand warm and steady at her waist as they joined the dance. He moved with surprising agility for a man who spent most of his days on horseback or working his ranch. "I didn't know you danced," Willow said as he guided her through a turn. "Haven't in years," he admitted, "but it seems like riding a horse the body remembers even when the mind has forgotten." They moved together with an ease that belied their short acquaintance, as if they had been dancing together for years rather than minutes. From across the room, Willow caught Samuel watching them, his expression thoughtful rather than resentful. "Your son is watching us," she murmured. Kent glanced over her shoulder. Samuel has his mother's perceptiveness. He sees more than he lets on. "And what do you think he sees now?" Kent's eyes returned to her face, their blue depth serious. "A possibility for all of us." The simple statement held such weight that Willow missed a step, though Kent's steady hand kept her from faltering. "Kent, I know it's too soon," he interrupted gently, "for any of us, but these past 2 weeks have shown me what could be. For the first time in 15 years, I'm thinking about the future instead of the past." Before Willow could respond, the music ended. Kent released her reluctantly, though his eyes promised that their conversation wasn't over. As they made their way back to the edge of the dance floor, Sheriff Mills approached, his expression grave. "Kent," he said quietly, "I need a word." Something in the sheriff's tone caused Kent to stiffen. "What is it?" Mills glanced at Willow, then back to Kent. "In private, preferably." Kent hesitated, then nodded. "Excuse us for a moment," he told Willow before following the sheriff to a quiet corner of the hall. Willow watched their exchange with growing concern. Though she couldn't hear their words, she could see the tension building in Kent's posture, the way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When he finally nodded and the sheriff departed, Kent stood motionless for a long moment before returning to her side. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. Kent's face was grim. "Foster's filed a formal complaint against Samuel and Daniel, claiming they shot his cattle, says he has a witness who saw them in the area. But that's impossible. They were with me all day." "I know that. You know that." "But Foster's determined to make trouble." Kent ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "The sheriff's giving me until Monday to bring the boys in for questioning. Says it's better if they come voluntarily than if he has to ride out to arrest them." Willow glanced around the room, locating both young men among the dancers. "Are you going to tell them tonight?" Kent shook his head. "No sense ruining the evening. This is the first time in years I've seen them enjoying themselves in town without causing trouble. I'll tell them tomorrow." "Do you think Foster genuinely believes they're responsible, or is this part of some larger strategy?" "Foster's many things, but stupid isn't one of them," Kent replied. "He knows perfectly well my boys were in town that day. This is about putting pressure on me over the water rights." Willow touched his arm gently. "What can I do to help?" The warmth returned to Kent's eyes as he looked down at her. "You already are helping just by being here, by believing in us." The rest of the evening passed pleasantly enough, though Willow was aware of the tension Kent carried despite his efforts to enjoy the dance. They shared 2 more dances, and Willow even persuaded Samuel to join a group dance that required no particular skill or formal partner. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed intent on dancing with every eligible young woman in attendance, his natural charm emerging in a way Willow hadn't witnessed before. As the evening wound down, Kent escorted Willow home, insisting that Samuel and Daniel could ride back to the ranch together. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamond dust as they walked side by side through the quiet streets of Copper Creek. "Despite everything I enjoyed tonight," Kent said as they reached Willow's porch. "So did I." She turned to face him in the soft glow of the lamp she had left burning in the window. "And I meant what I said. I want to help with the situation with Foster." Kent studied her face in the gentle light. "You've already done more than I could have asked, bringing my sons back to me in a way I'd nearly given up hope of seeing. They were never truly lost," Willow told him. "Just searching for their own path, their own way to deal with the pain of losing their mother. And what about you?" Kent asked softly. "What loss are you carrying, Willow Hayes?" The unexpected question caught her off guard. "What makes you think I've experienced loss, the way you understand grief, the patience you have with those who are suffering?" His eyes held hers. "Those aren't qualities that come from books or training alone." Willow hesitated, then decided on honesty. "My father died when I was 16, influenza. My mother had passed years earlier, so it was just me after that. I came west because there was nothing holding me in Boston, and teaching positions were plentiful here." Kent nodded slowly. "So you understand what it is to rebuild a life after everything familiar has been swept away." "Yes," she acknowledged. "Though I had the advantage of being nearly grown when it happened, your sons were still children. Children who needed more than I was able to give them," Kent said, regret heavy in his voice. "I focused on providing shelter, food, security, the physical necessities. I forgot about the emotional ones. You did the best you could. Did I?" He shook his head. "I'm not sure of that anymore, but I am sure that meeting you has shown me what I've been missing, what we've all been missing. A kindness that doesn't demand or expect, that simply gives and teaches by example." In the silence that followed his words, Willow became acutely aware of the small space between them, of the way Kent's eyes had softened as he looked at her. When he raised his hand to gently touch her cheek, she didn't pull away. "I know it's too soon," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I know there are complications that can't be ignored, but I need you to know that what I feel for you is real, Willow. More real than anything I've felt in 15 years. Willow placed her hand over his where it rested against her cheek. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "Not for what I feel." The admission seemed to release something in Kent. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to reconsider. But Willow remained where she was, her heart racing as his lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with shared hunger. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as she slid her hands up to his shoulders. The solid warmth of him, the scent of soap and leather and open air that clung to his clothes, the gentle pressure of his mouth against hers, all of it combined to create a sensation of homecoming Willow hadn't expected. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Kent rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the moment you stepped between my sons and the sheriff 2 weeks ago," Willow laughed softly. "Not the most romantic of meetings." "No," he agreed with a smile. "But seeing you stand your ground, offering a solution when everyone else was ready for conflict, I knew then that you were something special." He kissed her again, more briefly this time but with no less feeling. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "The boys will be wondering where I am." Willow nodded, though she made no move to step out of his embrace. "What will you tell them about Foster's complaint?" Kent sighed, the reminder of reality dimming the joy in his expression. "The truth. That it's a baseless accusation meant to pressure me over the water rights. And that we'll face it together as a family. Do you think they'll accept that? A week ago, I'd have said no. They'd have been halfway to the New Mexico territory before I could stop them." He smiled faintly. "But now, I think they might actually listen." Willow reached up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. Then that's progress worth celebrating. Kent caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Good night, Willow. I'll come by tomorrow after I've spoken with the boys. Good night, Kent. She watched him ride away, her lips still tingling from his kisses, her heart full of conflicting emotions. The joy of discovering that her feelings were returned warred with concern over Foster's accusations and what they might mean for the fragile reconciliation between Kent and his sons. As she prepared for bed, Willow found herself praying for the first time in years not for herself, but for the Thornton family that had unexpectedly become so important to her. The following day passed with excruciating slowness as Willow waited for news from Kent. She occupied herself with household chores and lesson plans for the coming week, but her thoughts continually returned to the Thorntons and the crisis they faced. When a knock finally came at her door late in the afternoon, Willow rushed to answer it, expecting Kent. Instead, she found Samuel on her porch, his expression troubled and his posture tense. "Samuel," she said in surprise, "is everything all right?" "No, Miss Hayes, it's not." He glanced over his shoulder as if checking to see if he had been followed. "May I come in?" Willow stepped back, allowing him to enter. "Of course, where's your father? Has something happened with Foster's complaint?" Samuel paced across her small sitting room, agitation evident in every movement. "Father told us about the complaint this morning. Said we'd ride into town tomorrow, talk to the sheriff, sort everything out." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "But Daniel's gone." "Gone?" Willow felt a chill of apprehension. "What do you mean?" He took off while Father and I were checking the south pasture. Left a note saying he wasn't going to jail for something he didn't do. Samuel ran a hand through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of his father. "He thinks Foster's rigged things, that the witness is lying and the sheriff won't believe us." "Oh, Samuel." Willow moved to his side, placing a hand on his arm. "Where would he go?" "I don't know. He has friends in Santa Fe, maybe there." Samuel looked down at her, his blue eyes troubled. "Father's out looking for him now. He sent me to tell you what's happened and to ask if you'd come to the ranch. He thinks we both think that if Daniel does come back, he might listen to you." The trust implicit in the request moved Willow deeply. "Of course I'll come. Let me get my things." As she quickly packed an overnight bag, Samuel continued, "Things were getting better. After the dance last night, we actually really talked, the three of us, for the first time in years." "About what?" Willow asked, hoping to keep him engaged as she prepared to leave. "About Mother. About how we've all been stuck in the past, letting her death define us instead of her life." Samuel swallowed hard. "Father told us how he'd made mistakes, how he'd pulled away when we needed him most. And Daniel and I admitted we'd made it hard for him to reconnect, pushing him away whenever he tried." Willow paused in her packing, touched by the breakthrough that had occurred. "That kind of honesty takes courage, from all of you." Samuel nodded. It felt good, like a weight lifting. His expression darkened again. "But then this morning, when Father told us about Foster's complaint, it was like all that progress vanished. Daniel got that look he gets when he's about to bolt, and no matter what we said, he wouldn't believe it would work out. Daniel has always been the more impulsive of you two," Willow observed as she fastened her bag. "He's scared," Samuel said simply. "We both were growing up. Scared Father would leave us too, like Mother did. So Daniel would act out, do wild things, and I'd follow along to keep him safe." He shook his head. "Only lately, I've started to see that I wasn't helping him by joining in. I was just making it easier for him to avoid growing up." Willow was struck by the maturity in his self-assessment. "You've done a lot of thinking these past 2 weeks." Samuel met her gaze directly. "Because of you, you made me see that there are other ways to be a man than just being tough or wild or defiant." "I simply provided an opportunity," Willow said gently. "You did the hard work yourself." They rode to the rocking tee in tense silence, pushing their horses as fast as was safe in the fading light. The ranch was eerily quiet when they arrived, most of the hands out searching for Daniel along with Kent. As they stabled their horses, Samuel finally spoke again. "Father cares for you, you know, more than he has for anyone since Mother." Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Your father and I have become friends, yes," Samuel snorted softly. "More than friends, I'd say, the way he looks at you." He trailed off, then added, "It's good for him, for all of us, maybe." Before Willow could respond to this unexpected approval, the sound of approaching riders drew their attention. Kent rode into the yard, his expression tight with worry and exhaustion. 2 ranch hands accompanied him, both looking equally tired. Any sign of him? Samuel asked, already knowing the answer from his father's face. Kent dismounted wearily. "Nothing. We checked all his usual haunts, spoke to everyone who might know where he'd go." He noticed Willow and managed a brief, grateful smile. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," she replied, wishing she could embrace him but aware of the hands watching them. "Samuel told me what happened." Kent nodded to the hands. "Get some rest. We'll start again at first light." As the men moved off toward the bunkhouse, Kent turned back to Willow and Samuel. "Let's go inside. We need to talk." In the main house, Kent built up the fire while Samuel prepared coffee. The domesticity of the scene struck Willow as poignant father and son working together in the absence of the third member of their family, worry uniting them in a way that happier circumstances had not yet managed to do. When they were settled with steaming cups, Kent addressed his son directly. "I've been thinking, Foster's complaint isn't just about pressuring me over the water rights. It's too specific, too targeted at you boys." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's trying to drive a wedge between us. He knows your history of rebellion, knows that under pressure, you and Daniel might run, which would make you look guilty and leave me vulnerable." Kent's jaw tightened. "And it's working exactly as he planned." "Daniel didn't think that through," Samuel said quietly. "He just reacted." "It's his pattern," Kent agreed without condemnation. "But it's time we broke these patterns, all of us. When we find him, and we will find him, we're going to face this together. No running, no dividing, we stand as a family." The determination in his voice was matched by the fierce light in his eyes, and Willow felt a surge of admiration for this man who had finally found his way back to being the father his sons needed. "I'll ride out at first light with you," Samuel said. "I might know a few places we haven't checked yet." Kent nodded, then turned to Willow. "I'm sorry to bring you into this mess. It wasn't how I imagined your first visit to the ranch as my guest would go." The intimacy of his words, spoken openly in front of his son, made Willow's heart flutter. "I'm glad to be here, however difficult the circumstances." Samuel cleared his throat. "I'll turn in. Morning comes early." He stood, hesitated, then added awkwardly, "Good night, Father, Miss Hayes." When he had gone upstairs, Kent moved to sit beside Willow on the sofa, taking her hand in his. "I've missed you," he said simply. "Even though it's only been a day." "I've missed you too," she admitted. "I spent the whole day worrying about how the boys would take the news about Foster." Kent squeezed her hand gently. "You've become important to all of us, Willow. More quickly than I would have thought possible." "Do you think Daniel will come back on his own?" she asked. Kent sighed heavily. "I don't know. He's impulsive, but he's not stupid. He'll realize eventually that running only makes him look guilty." He ran his thumb over her knuckles in a gentle caress. "But I'm not waiting for him to figure that out. I'm going to find him and bring him home. And then we'll face Foster's accusations together. Present our evidence, including your testimony, and put an end to this nonsense." Kent's expression hardened. "And after that, Foster and I will have a long overdue conversation about boundaries and respect." Willow hesitated, then voiced the concern that had been growing since Samuel told her what had happened. "Could it become dangerous? Foster seems desperate." "It already is dangerous," Kent replied grimly. "A desperate man is unpredictable, but I won't let him threaten my family, and that includes you now, Willow." The simple declaration warmed her even as it heightened her concern. "I can take care of myself," she assured him. "My worry is for your sons." Kent smiled faintly. "I know you can. It's one of the things I admire about you." He leaned closer, his voice softening. "But you should know that since you came into our lives, taking care of ourselves individually isn't enough anymore. We take care of each other now. That's what family does." The word family echoed in Willow's heart, awakening longing she had suppressed for years. "Kent," he silenced her with a gentle kiss, his free hand coming up to cradle her face. "I know it's soon," he murmured against her lips. "Too soon to speak of permanence or promises. But I want you to know that when this crisis has passed, when Daniel is home and Foster is dealt with, I have much more to say to you about the future." Willow leaned into his touch, allowing herself to believe in the possibility of that future. "I'll be here to listen," she promised. They spent another hour by the fire, discussing strategies for finding Daniel and dealing with Foster's false accusations. When exhaustion finally drove them to seek rest, Kent showed Willow to a guest room, his kiss goodnight lingering with promise despite the worry that still lined his face. Alone in the unfamiliar room, Willow found sleep elusive. Her mind raced with concerns for Daniel, with strategies for confronting Foster, with the memory of Kent's kisses and the future he had hinted at. Outside, the wind had risen, moaning around the eaves of the house like a restless spirit. She had just begun to drift off when a sound jerked her fully awake, the creak of a floorboard in the hallway outside her door. Willow sat up, straining to hear. For a moment, there was nothing, and she began to think she had imagined it. Then came a soft knock. "Willow." It was Kent's voice, pitched low to avoid disturbing the household. "Are you awake?" She rose quickly, pulling on her robe before opening the door. Kent stood in the hallway, fully dressed, a lantern in his hand. "What is it?" she asked, immediately alert. "Has something happened?" One of the hands just rode in. "There's a fire at the north boundary near Silverstone Creek." His face was grim in the lantern light. "Foster's doing, I'd bet my life on it." "A fire?" Willow felt a chill of fear. "Is it threatening the ranch?" "Not yet, but the wind's up and shifting." "We need to get out there, try to contain it." He hesitated. "I don't want to leave you here alone, but I need every hand I can get." "I'm coming with you," Willow said without hesitation, already turning back to her room. "Give me 2 minutes to dress." Kent looked as if he might argue, then nodded sharply. "I'll wake Samuel. Meet us at the stables." Willow dressed quickly in the riding skirt and blouse she had packed, securing her hair in a simple braid. By the time she reached the stables, the ranch was alive with activity men saddling horses, loading wagons with barrels of water and tools for fighting the fire. Kent and Samuel were checking their own mounts when she arrived. Samuel looked pale but determined, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Miss Hayes," he acknowledged her with a nod. "Father says you're coming with us." "I am." She moved to saddle her horse, refusing Kent's offer of help. "I've seen prairie fires before, I know what to do." Kent's expression was a mixture of pride and concern. "Stay close to me or Samuel. If the wind shifts suddenly, don't try to outrun the fire, find a creek bed or bare ground and shelter there." The ride to the northern boundary took nearly an hour, during which the glow on the horizon grew steadily brighter. As they crested the final hill, Willow caught her breath at the sight below. A wall of flame stretched across the grassland, devouring everything in its path as it advanced toward the ranch. Men on horseback darted along its edges, using wet blankets and shovels to battle the blaze where they could, while others worked to create fire breaks by clearing strips of land ahead of the flames. Kent immediately began issuing orders, sending men to the most vulnerable areas. Samuel rode off to organize a team to protect a nearby stand of trees that, if ignited, would spread the fire faster than they could hope to contain it. For the next several hours, Willow worked alongside the ranch hands, ferrying water, helping to create fire breaks, doing whatever was needed in the desperate battle against the advancing flames. The heat was intense, the smoke acrid in her lungs, but she pushed through her exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that the rocking T. Kent's life's work was at stake. It was nearing dawn, the fire finally beginning to yield to their efforts, when a shout from the eastern edge of the blaze caught everyone's attention. "Rider coming in fast," someone called. Kent, who had been working nearby, straightened and peered through the smoke. Willow joined him, squinting against the haze. A horse and rider were indeed approaching at a gallop, and even at a distance, she recognized the chestnut mare. "Daniel," Kent breathed, relief and concern mingling in his voice. The younger Thornton reined in his horse sharply as he reached them, his face streaked with soot and his clothes singed in places. "Foster's men," he gasped, coughing from the smoke he had ridden through. "They're on the other side of the creek, making sure the fire spreads this way." Kent's expression hardened. "You saw them?" Daniel nodded, gulping from the canteen Willow handed him. "Was headed back to the ranch when I saw the glow. rode toward it and spotted them 5 men with torches, setting new fires where you'd just put them out. "Where's Foster?" Kent demanded. "Didn't see him, just his foreman and some others I recognized from his ranch." Daniel coughed again. "They saw me too, took a shot at me, but I got away in the smoke." Kent turned to the nearest hand. "Find Samuel, tell him what's happening. Then get the sheriff, he should be on his way already, but make sure he knows Foster's men are deliberately spreading the fire." As the man rode off, Kent faced his younger son. "You came back." Daniel met his father's gaze steadily. "Couldn't leave you to face this alone, any of you." His eyes flicked to Willow, then back to Kent. "I was wrong to run, I see that now." The simple admission seemed to ease something in Kent. He clasped his son's shoulder firmly. "We'll talk more later. For now, we need to stop Foster's men before they burn us out completely." For the next hour, they focused on containing the fire's eastern edge, where Foster's men had been setting new blazes. The wind, mercifully, began to shift in their favor, driving the flames back toward already burned areas where they found no new fuel. Dawn was breaking, the fire mostly contained, when Sheriff Mills arrived with several deputies. Kent quickly explained what Daniel had witnessed, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting over the roar of the flames and inhaling smoke. "I'll send men across the creek," Mills promised. "If Foster's people are still there, we'll find them." But a shout from one of the deputies interrupted their conversation. "Sheriff, look there." They turned to see a wagon approaching from the direction of town, moving at a dangerous speed over the rough terrain. 2 men sat on the bench, one driving, the other holding what appeared to be a rifle. "That's Foster," Kent said grimly, recognizing the driver despite the distance. "What the hell is he thinking, coming here now?" Mills muttered, squinting against the rising sun. "Nothing good," Kent replied. He turned to Willow and Daniel. "Stay back, both of you." But as the wagon drew nearer, it became apparent that Foster's intent was far from peaceful. He reined in his horses some 50 yards away, and his companion raised his rifle, aiming it directly at Kent. "Thornton." Foster bellowed across the distance. "This ends now." Sheriff Mills stepped forward, his hand on his own weapon. "Put down that gun, Foster, you're already in enough trouble." But Foster seemed beyond reason, his face contorted with rage even at a distance. "Your boys burned my barn last night, Thornton, killed 2 of my best horses. After everything else, that's the final straw." Daniel stiffened beside Willow. "That's a lie, I was nowhere near his ranch, we know that," Kent said quietly. "He's desperate, making up new accusations to justify his actions." Foster's companion, his foreman, Reed Willow, recalled, kept his rifle trained on Kent. "The boss said to put you down if you resist," he called. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "There are witnesses here, Foster," Mills shouted. "A dozen men who can testify your people were deliberately spreading the fire. Put down your weapons and surrender." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Foster reached for something beside him on the wagon bench, a shotgun that had been concealed by the seat. Before anyone could react, he raised it and fired in Kent's direction. The blast went wide, but it triggered immediate chaos. Sheriff Mills and his deputies drew their weapons. Kent pushed Willow and Daniel toward the cover of a nearby wagon, and Foster's foreman opened fire, bullets splintering wood inches from where they crouched. "Stay down," Kent ordered, drawing his own revolver. "Father, no." Daniel grabbed his arm. "Let the sheriff handle this," but Kent's expression was resolute. "Foster won't stop until he's forced to. He's made that clear." "Then we face him together," Daniel insisted, his own hand moving to the gun at his hip. "You said we're a family. That means we stand together." A complex mixture of emotions crossed Kent's face: pride, fear, determination. Finally, he nodded. "Together then, but carefully." Willow watched in growing horror as Kent and Daniel prepared to move from behind the wagon. "Please," she begged, catching Kent's free hand, "there must be another way." Kent's eyes softened as they met hers. "Stay safe," he murmured, squeezing her hand before releasing it. But before either Thornton could move, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew everyone's attention. Samuel appeared from the east, leading a group of ranch hands who had been fighting the fire on the far side of the property. They rode hard, converging on Foster's position from behind. Foster and his foreman, caught by surprise, turned to face this new threat. In their moment of distraction, Sheriff Mills and his deputies advanced, weapons trained on the two men. "Drop your weapons," Mills commanded. Now, seeing himself surrounded, Foster's foreman slowly lowered his rifle, but Foster himself seemed to have passed beyond reason. With a cry of rage, he raised his shotgun again, aiming at the nearest figure, Samuel, who had dismounted and was approaching cautiously. Time seemed to slow as Willow watched in horror. Daniel shouted a warning. Kent lunged from behind the wagon toward his elder son, and Foster's finger tightened on the trigger. The blast of the shotgun coincided with another shot, this one from Daniel's revolver. Foster jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as he dropped his weapon and clutched at his shoulder where Daniel's bullet had struck him. His own shot went wild, harmlessly into the air rather than toward Samuel. In seconds, the sheriff's men had both Foster and his foreman disarmed and restrained. Kent reached Samuel, gripping him by the shoulders as if to reassure himself that his son was unharmed. Daniel remained where he was, his revolver still raised, a look of shock on his face as the realization of what he had done sank in. Willow moved to his side, gently placing her hand on his arm. "Lower the gun, Daniel. It's over." He looked at her as if emerging from a trance, then slowly holstered his weapon. "I shot him," he said, his voice barely audible. "I've never shot a man before." "You saved your brother's life," Willow told him firmly. "You did what you had to do." Kent and Samuel joined them, Kent immediately pulling Daniel into a fierce embrace. "You did well, son," he said roughly. "Better than well." When he released Daniel, Samuel stepped forward. The brothers looked at each other for a long moment, years of rivalry and resentment seeming to dissolve in the aftermath of crisis. Then Samuel extended his hand, which Daniel grasped firmly. "Thank you," Samuel said simply. Daniel nodded, words apparently beyond him. But the connection between the brothers had been forged anew in those moments of danger, a bond that Willow sensed would be stronger now than ever before. Sheriff Mills approached, his expression grave but satisfied. "Foster's wound isn't serious. He'll live to face charges: arson, attempted murder, false accusations." He looked at Daniel. "Your shot was clearly in defense of your brother. There'll be no charges against you." Daniel seemed to sag slightly with relief. "And the complaint against us, about the cattle?" "Withdrawn given the circumstances," Mills replied. "Though I'll need statements from all of you about what happened here." Kent nodded. "We'll come into town tomorrow. Right now my family needs rest." The sheriff tipped his hat. "Understood, we'll handle things from here." As Mills walked away, Kent turned to his sons. "You two head back to the ranch, get some food and sleep. I'll follow shortly with Miss Hayes." Both young men looked exhausted enough not to argue. As they mounted their horses, Samuel paused. "Miss Hayes," he said, "thank you for everything." Willow smiled, touched by the simple acknowledgement. "You're welcome, Samuel." When they had ridden away, Kent turned to Willow, reaching for her hands. His face was streaked with soot, his clothes singed and dirty from fighting the fire, but his eyes were clear and bright as they met hers. "Are you all right?" he asked, his thumbs gently stroking the backs of her hands. "I should be asking you that," she replied. "You nearly lost everything today, your ranch, your sons. But I didn't." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Because of you, Willow. You brought my family back together in time for us to face this crisis united instead of divided. If you hadn't stepped in 2 weeks ago." He didn't need to finish the thought. Both of them could imagine how differently things might have unfolded if the Thornton family had still been fractured by years of resentment and poor communication. "It wasn't just me," Willow said softly. "You were ready to change. Your sons were ready to listen. I just provided the opportunity." Kent shook his head, a smile touching his lips despite his exhaustion. "Always deflecting praise, another quality I admire in you." His expression grew serious again. "I meant what I said last night. When this is over, we need to talk about the future, our future." The simple declaration sent warmth spreading through Willow despite her fatigue and the lingering smoke in the air. "Yes," she agreed. "We do." Kent drew her into his arms, his embrace gentle despite his strength. "Let's go home," he murmured against her hair. "All of us." 3 months later, on a crisp December morning, Willow Hayes stood at the altar of Copper Creek's small church. her hand clasped firmly in Kent Thornton's, as Reverend Parker pronounced them husband and wife. The church was filled to capacity, the townsfolk having largely embraced the romance that had blossomed so unexpectedly between the schoolteacher and the rancher. Samuel and Daniel stood as their father's groomsmen, both looking uncomfortable but proud in new suits purchased for the occasion. In the front pew sat Jake Foster's widow, Martha, who had approached Willow after her husband's death with an apology for his actions and a request to start anew between their families. Foster himself had died in prison while awaiting trial, his health broken by the wound and subsequent infection. As Kent leaned down to seal their vows with a kiss, Willow felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find on the frontier. She had come west seeking purpose and independence, never imagining she would find a family to call her own. The reception was held at the Rocking T, the ranch house transformed by Samuel and Daniel's efforts. Gone was the shrine-like quality it had held to Sarah Thornton's memory, replaced by decorations that honored the past while embracing the present. Sarah's portrait still hung in a place of honor, but new photographs and mementos had joined it, creating a home that lived and breathed rather than one frozen in time. As guests mingled in the main room, Willow found a moment alone with her new stepsons on the veranda. Both young men had changed remarkably in the months since their community service had begun. Samuel had discovered a genuine interest in literature and history, spending evenings discussing books with Willow and contributing thoughtful insights. Daniel had channeled his energy into ranching, revealing a natural talent for working with the horses that his father had always hoped he would develop. "Happy, Mrs. Thornton?" Samuel asked with a grin, still testing the new name that Willow was herself adjusting to. "Very," she replied honestly. "And you, both of you," the brothers exchanged a glance, some unspoken communication passing between them. "We are," Daniel answered for both of them. "It's different, having a woman in the house again, but good different. Father smiles now," Samuel added. "Really smiles. Not just that strained thing he used to do when he was trying to pretend everything was fine." Willow felt a surge of affection for these young men who had found their way back from anger and rebellion to become the thoughtful, capable people she had always sensed they could be. "Your mother would be proud of you both," she said softly. "I never knew her, but I know that much." Daniel looked away, but not before Willow caught the sheen of tears in his eyes. Samuel placed a hand on his brother's shoulder, then spoke to Willow. "She would have liked you. You have her kindness." The door opened behind them and Kent stepped onto the veranda. "There you are," he said, his face lighting with pleasure at the sight of his family together. "Am I interrupting?" "Just welcoming Willow to the family," Samuel replied. He nudged his brother. "Come on, Daniel. Let's give them a moment." As the brothers went back inside, Kent moved to Willow's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Are you happy, Mrs. Thornton?" he asked, echoing his son's question. Willow leaned into his embrace, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she replied truthfully. Kent pressed a kiss to her temple. "When you stepped between my sons and the sheriff that day, offering to teach them kindness, I never dreamed it would lead us here. Didn't you?" Willow teased. "You seemed quite taken with me even then." Kent laughed, the sound rich and free in a way it hadn't been when they first met. "Perhaps I was, though I didn't dare hope you might return the feeling." "How could I not?" Willow turned in his arms to face him fully. "You're a good man, Kent Thornton. A good father, a good rancher, and now a good husband." His eyes, blue as the Arizona sky, softened with emotion. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you," he promised. "We'll be worthy of each other," Willow corrected gently, "and of the family we've created together." Kent kissed her then, a kiss that held promise and passion and a future stretching out before them like the vast western horizon, challenging, sometimes dangerous, but filled with beauty and possibility. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Willow stood on the porch with Kent, watching as Samuel and Daniel bid farewell to the last visitors. The brothers were laughing together, their earlier rivalry transformed into the deep bond that would carry them through the rest of their lives. "My sons don't listen to anyone," Kent had said that fateful day in Copper Creek's dusty Main Street. "Then let me teach them kindness," Willow had replied, never imagining the journey those simple words would set in motion. As Kent's arm tightened around her waist, and his sons turned to include them in their laughter, Willow knew that she had found her true purpose not just in teaching, but in loving this family that had become her own. In the Wild West, where harshness often reigned, they had carved out a space for kindness to flourish, proving that even the most stubborn hearts could learn to listen when the right voice spoke. And in that knowledge, Willow Thornton found a happiness as vast and enduring as the Arizona sky above them.